The glass tower of Zenith Beats pierced the Seattle skyline, its sleek facade reflecting the moody October drizzle like a mirror of ambition. Inside the lobby thrummed with the controlled chaos of a music label on the brink of a major release. Interns darted between glass-walled offices, clutching tablets and coffee cups, while phones buzzed with last-minute artist demands. A faint bass line from an upstairs studio pulsed through the air, barely audible over the hum of corporate machinery. At the center of the marble atrium stood a drum kit, black chrome pristine, a relic from a punk band Zenith had signed a decade ago. It was less an instrument and more a monument, untouched, untouchable, gleaming under the pendant lights like a forgotten god. Isabel Torres, CEO of Zenith Beats, strode through the lobby at 10:17 p.m., her heels clicking a rhythm sharper than any metronome. At 38, she was a force sharp-eyed with dark hair pulled into a flawless chignon, her presence capable of silencing a room or igniting it. Tonight, she was restless. Another 18-hour day of investor calls, contract disputes, and a looming gala she barely cared about weighed on her. Her phone glowed in her hand, emails piling up like sand in an hourglass, each one a reminder of the empire she'd built, but never quite belonged to. She didn't notice the janitor until she nearly tripped over his mop. He was crouched near the drum kit, polishing its chrome stand, with a cloth, his movements slow, deliberate, almost reverent. Mateo Alvarez, mid-30s, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell slightly too long over his forehead. His janitor's uniform was crisp, but his hands, calloused, steady, betrayed a story the uniform couldn't tell. Isabel stopped, one eyebrow raised, her voice cutting through the silence. "Careful," she said, half-joking. "Polish that thing any harder, and it might start thinking it's a Stradivarius." Mateo glanced up, his eyes a deep brown that caught the light like polished amber, clear yet unreadable. "Wouldn't want that," he replied, his voice low, steady, with a faint trace of an accent she couldn't place. "Drums don't dream like violins do," she smirked, leaning against the drum kit's pedestal, her tailored blazer catching the light. "You sound like you know them. Ever play?" He paused, folding the cloth with the precision of someone folding a flag. "I've hit a few in my time." "Then, let's see it." The challenge slipped out before she could stop it. Reckless, absurd. "Play something worth hearing, and I'll marry you on the spot." The words hung in the air, sharp and out of place in the sterile lobby. She didn't know why she said it. Maybe the exhaustion, maybe the way the empty atrium felt too quiet, or maybe the way Mateo looked at the drums not as a prop, but as something alive, something remembered. He didn't laugh, didn't blush. He just stood, one hand resting lightly on the snare, his gaze steady. "I heard you," he said, his tone calm but firm, "but drums aren't for dares. They're for saying something you can't speak." Isabel's smirk faltered, caught off guard by the weight in his words. "So you do know how to play?" He didn't answer, just returned to his work, wiping a smudge from the cymbal with the same care he'd given the stand. She studied him a moment longer, his broad shoulders, the quiet intensity in his movements, then scoffed softly. "Didn't think so." She turned on her heel, her footsteps echoing as she headed for the elevator. The moment was over, swallowed by the hum of the city outside and the faint whine of a floor buffer in the distance. But as the elevator doors closed, she caught a glimpse of Mateo standing alone, his hand hovering over the drum kit, not touching, just lingering, as if listening to a rhythm no one else could hear. The next morning, Isabel's assistant, Carla, handed her a coffee and a tablet with the day's agenda. Board meeting at 10, artist pitch at noon, and the gala's string quartet is threatening to pull out unless we cover their travel costs. Isabel barely listened, her eyes drifting across the lobby to the drum kit. A faint smudge on the snare caught the morning light, a fingerprint Matteo hadn't erased. She remembered his hands, the way they moved with purpose, not haste. It unsettled her, though she couldn't say why. "Carla," she interrupted, her voice sharper than intended. "Who's the overnight janitor?" Carla blinked, adjusting her glasses. "Matteo Alvarez. Started 8 months ago. Quiet guy, keeps to himself." Why Isabel didn't answer. She just stared at the drums, then turned back to her tablet as if nothing had happened. The day dragged on, meetings, budgets, a tense call with an artist's manager who thought creative differences meant scream at the CEO. By 9 p.m., she was back in her office, the city's skyline, a mosaic of lights beyond her window. The gala was in 3 days, and the board was breathing down her neck about quarterly projections. She shut her laptop, the silence of her office pressing against her temples, and wandered downstairs, drawn to the lobby's stillness. The lights were dim, casting the drum kit in a soft, almost sacred glow. There was Matteo, kneeling, polishing the bass drum's pedal with the same care he'd given the cymbal the night before. She cleared her throat, leaning against a marble pillar. "I owe you an apology." He didn't stop working, didn't even flinch. "For what?" "For being a jerk last night. The drum thing. It was flippant." He paused, looking up, his eyes catching hers. "Most people don't apologize for flippant." "I'm not most people," she said, crossing her arms. "I'm thorough. That's how I survive." Matteo stood, wiping his hands on his cloth, his movements unhurried. "Then you should know drums aren't a game. They're a pulse. A story you feel in your bones." She tilted her head, intrigued despite herself. "You talk like someone who's played for more than a basement band." He gave a small cryptic smile, barely a curve of his lips. "I've played a lot of things. Doesn't mean I still do. Why not?" He looked at her, his gaze steady but distant, like he was seeing something beyond the lobby. "Because some stories don't need you to keep telling them. They just need you to live." Isabel was quiet, her usual sharpness dulled by the weight of his words. She'd spent years building Zenith Beats, navigating lawsuits, market crashes, and artist meltdowns. But this man, this janitor, spoke like he'd carried something heavier than a mop. "That sounds like something a man says when he's lost more than he meant to." Matteo's gaze softened just for a moment, like a door briefly opened. "Good night, Ms. Torres." He turned to leave, his footsteps soft against the marble. She called after him, her voice quieter now. "Wait." He stopped, half turning. She stepped closer to the drum kit, running her hand along the rim of the snare, its surface cool under her fingers. "Next time I say something stupid, call me out." "Do you say stupid things often?" He asked, a faint spark of humor in his eyes. "Only when I'm trying to figure out what I'm feeling." He looked at her, his expression unreadable, but warm, like a fire seen from a distance. "You're closer to figuring it out than you think." Then he walked away, leaving the lobby silent, except for the faint hum of the city and the echo of her own heartbeat. The next evening, Isabel found herself at a small music cafe in Capitol Hill, dragged there by her friend Lena, who swore the open mic was life-changing. Isabel wasn't convinced. She sipped a lukewarm latte, half listening to a folk singer butcher a Dylan, cover her mind still on the gala and the board's expectations. But halfway through a lackluster set, the house band's drummer didn't show. The bassist, a lanky kid with a nose ring, scanned the crowd, visibly panicked. Then Matteo stood up from a corner table where he'd been nursing a coffee unnoticed in the dim light. He walked to the stage, picked up the drumsticks, and sat at the kit. The first beat hit like thunder, a deep, resonant boom that silenced the room. The crowd froze, drinks halfway to lips conversations cut off mid-sentence. Mateo didn't just play, he commanded the drums, weaving a rhythm that was raw, precise, and alive, a fusion of Latin beats and modern jazz that felt like it could wake the dead. His hands were a blur, but his face was calm, almost serene, as if the music was an extension of his breath. The band scrambled to keep up, but he carried them his rhythm, the heartbeat of the song. When it ended, the crowd erupted, clapping and whistling, but Mateo just set the sticks down and returned to his table, unnoticed by most. Except Isabel. She approached him, her heart pounding, her latte forgotten. "You didn't tell me you could do that." He shrugged, sipping his coffee. "You didn't ask. Where did you learn to play like that, a long time ago in places louder than this?" She sat across from him, refusing to let it go. "You're not just a guy who cleans floors, are you?" He met her eyes, his gaze steady, unguarded for the first time. "And you're not just a woman who runs a company. We all wear masks, Ms. Torres." That night, Isabel couldn't sleep. Her penthouse, with its floor-to-ceiling windows and minimalist decor, felt colder than usual, the silence oppressive. She pulled up her laptop and searched his name. It took an hour, but she found it a grainy YouTube clip from a 2010 music festival in Portland. A young Mateo Alvarez 20-something behind a drum kit, driving a fusion band with a rhythm that felt like it could shift the Earth's axis. The comments called him a prodigy, a rising star, a name destined for stages bigger than Portland. Then nothing. No more videos, no interviews, no trace. After 2012, just a ghost who'd traded a stage for a mop. The next morning, she found him in the lobby wiping down the drum kit again. She didn't hesitate. "I saw the video. Portland 2010. You were incredible. Why did you stop?" Mateo didn't look up his cloth, moving in slow circles. "You've been digging. I don't like mysteries in my building." He stood folding his cloth with that same deliberate care. "I'm not a mystery. I'm just a man doing what needs doing." "No," she said, stepping closer, her voice firm. "You're hiding, and I want to know why." He sighed, leaning against the drum kit, his eyes distant. "You ever love something so much it becomes your whole world, only to have life rewrite the score?" She nodded, her voice softer now. "Yeah, I used to play drums too, not like you, but enough to know it's more than sound. It's survival." "Then you know why I stopped," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Survival changes what you play for." Isabel's throat tightened. She'd spent years building Zenith Beats, turning it from a struggling indie label into a powerhouse. But she'd done it alone. Her own drumsticks gathering dust in a closet somewhere. "What changed for you?" she asked. He looked at her, his expression raw, unguarded. "My brother, Diego. He was born sick, heart condition. I was 25, playing festivals, signing deals. Then he got worse, and I was all he had. Stages don't pay hospital bills. Mops do." She stared at him, the weight of his words settling like a stone. "So, you gave it all up?" "Not all of it," he said, his voice steady again, "just the parts that didn't matter as much as he did." She didn't know what to say to that. For once, her quick wit, her boardroom armor felt useless. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "Don't be," he replied. "I'm not." They stood there, the drum kit between them, its chrome catching the light, like a silent promise. Then Mateo picked up his cloth and walked away, leaving Isabel alone with the echo of his words and the faint rhythm of her own pulse louder than it had been in years. That evening, Isabel found herself wandering near the waterfront, where a group of teenagers was playing drums on overturned buckets, their rhythms wild and unpolished, but full of life. She stopped watching from a distance, and then she saw him, Mateo, kneeling beside one of the kids adjusting their grip on a pair of sticks, his voice low and encouraging. The kid nodded, tried again, and the beat sharpened, steadied. Mateo smiled a small, unguarded smile, and Isabel felt something shift inside her, something she hadn't felt since she'd traded her drumsticks for a corner office. She didn't approach him. She just watched the city's hum, blending with the kids' rhythms, and for the first time in years, she wondered what it would feel like to play again, not for applause, not for power, but for the sheer joy of it. As she turned to leave, her phone buzzed with an email from the board demanding updates on the gala. She ignored it. For once, the drums were louder. The Zenith Beats Gala was 48 hours away, and the air in the glass tower felt like it was holding its breath. Isabel Torres sat in her corner office, the Seattle skyline a gray blur beyond the rain-streaked windows. Her desk was a battlefield of contracts, budgets, and a half-finished speech for the gala, where investors expected her to charm them into opening their wallets. The headliner, a jazz drummer from New Orleans, had just canceled family emergency, his agent said, and the events team was scrambling to find a replacement. Isabel's phone buzzed relentlessly, each notification a new demand, a new crisis. But her mind wasn't on the gala. It was on Mateo Alvarez, the janitor who wasn't a janitor, whose hands had turned a drum kit into a living pulse at a Capitol Hill cafe 2 nights ago. She hadn't meant for that moment in the lobby, the reckless dare about marrying him if he could play, to mean anything. But the way he'd played at the cafe, the way his rhythm had cut through the noise of her carefully controlled life, had left a crack in her armor. She saw it again in her mind, his hands calloused but precise, moving like they were speaking a language she'd forgotten. And his eyes deep, unguarded, seeing her not as the CEO, but as something else, something she hadn't been in years. It unsettled her, and Isabel Torres didn't do unsettled. She found him in the staff break room at noon, scrubbing a coffee stain from the counter with the same deliberate care he'd given the drum kit. The room smelled of bleach and burnt espresso, but Mateo moved like he was immune to both. She closed the door behind her, the click loud in the silence. "Mateo," she said, her voice steady but quieter than usual. "I need to know the truth. About you." He didn't stop scrubbing, didn't even glance up. "About what? About who you are." She stepped closer, her heels muted against the linoleum. "I saw the Portland video. You weren't just good, you were a force. People called you a prodigy. Then you vanished in 2012. No scandals, no farewell tour, just gone. And now you're here cleaning floors in my building, while artists who couldn't hold a candle to you get million-dollar contracts." He paused, setting the rag down with a gentleness that felt out of place for a man his size. "You've done your homework." "I'm thorough," she said, crossing her arms. "I don't like mysteries in my building." Mateo dried his hands on a towel, his movements unhurried. "I'm not a mystery, Ms. Torres. I'm just a man doing his job." "No," she said, her voice sharper now. "You're hiding, and I want to know why." He leaned back against the counter, arms crossed loosely, his eyes meeting hers with a quiet intensity. You ever lose something that made sense of everything, and then have to figure out how to keep going when it's gone? She didn't answer right away. Her life was a series of calculated moves, boardroom victories, market expansions, artist signings, but there was a time long ago when she'd felt something else. A rhythm, a pulse behind a drum kit in her father's garage. She'd buried it under ambition, But Mateo's question brought it back sharp and unwelcome. "Yeah," she said finally. "I used to play drums. Not like you, but enough to know it's not just music. It's air. Survival." He nodded like he'd expected her to understand. "Then you know why I stopped. Survival changes what you play for." She stepped closer, her voice softening. "What changed for you?" He hesitated, his gaze drifting to the window where the rain painted streaks across the glass. "My brother Diego. He was born with a heart defect, congenital, inoperable for years. I was 25, playing festivals, signing deals, living the life everyone said I should. Then he got worse. Our parents were gone, and I was all he had. Stages don't pay hospital bills. Mops do." Isabel's throat tightened. She'd built Zenith Beats from a struggling indie label into a powerhouse, but it had cost her friendships, Sleep, the girl who once played drums, until her hands bled. "So you gave it all up?" "Not all of it," he said, his voice steady again. "Just the parts that didn't matter as much as he did." She didn't know what to say. Her world was built on control, on knowing every move before it happened, but Mateo's words were a rhythm she couldn't predict. "I'm sorry," she said, the words feeling small. "Don't be," he replied. "I'm not." They stood in silence, the hum of the building filling the space between them. Then Isabel said, "I want to hear you play again, not for a dare. For real." He gave her a long look, not guarded, but searching. "Why, because I think you're still carrying that music. Even if you don't play it." He didn't answer, just picked up his rag and went back to work. But as she left the break room, Isabel felt something shift a beat, faint but persistent, like a drum roll she hadn't noticed until now. That evening, she found herself back in the lobby, the drum kit glowing under the dim lights. She hadn't planned to stay late, but the gala prep was suffocating, and the silence of the atrium felt like a reprieve. She ran her hand along the snare, its surface cool and smooth, and for a moment she was 17 again, playing in her father's garage, the world nothing but rhythm and possibility. She picked up the sticks, her fingers awkward but familiar, and tapped a soft beat on the snare. It was tentative, clumsy, but it felt like coming home. Mateo's voice came from behind her. "You're holding the sticks too tight." She turned, startled. He was standing near the elevator, a bucket in one hand, his eyes soft but knowing. "You're one to talk," she said, recovering her composure. "You going to critique my form now?" He set the bucket down and walked over his steps, quiet against the marble. Not critiquing, just noticing. He took the sticks from her, his fingers brushing hers for a split second, and adjusted her grip. "Looser. Let the rhythm find you, not the other way around." She tried again, the beat steadier this time, and he nodded. "Better. Now add the bass." She hesitated, then tapped the pedal, the low thump resonating through her chest. Mateo picked up another pair of sticks and joined her, layering a syncopated rhythm on the toms that wove around her beat like a conversation. It wasn't polished, wasn't perfect, but it was alive. For 3 minutes, the lobby wasn't a corporate shrine, it was a stage, and they were the only ones on it. When they stopped, the silence felt heavier, fuller. Isabel exhaled, her hands still tingling. "I haven't played in 15 years. Why'd you stop?" he asked, his voice gentle but direct. She looked at the drums, not at him. "My father. He was a drummer, small gigs, never made it big. Said I wasn't good enough to waste my time on it. Told me to aim higher, be something more. So I did." Mateo nodded like he understood more than she'd said. "And now you're here running an empire, but you're still hearing him." She swallowed the truth, stinging. "Yeah." He set the sticks down, his voice quiet. You don't have to listen to him anymore." Before she could respond, her phone buzzed a text from Carla about the gala's catering budget. The spell broke. She stepped back, smoothing her blazer. "I should go." Mateo nodded, picking up his bucket. "Good night, Ms. Torres." "Isabel," she said, surprising herself. "Call me Isabel." He smiled, just a flicker. "Good night, Isabel." The next day, the office was a whirlwind. The replacement drummer, a local session musician, was confirmed, but the board was pushing for a bigger name, and the budget was already stretched thin. Isabel was in a meeting when Carla burst in, her face pale. "You need to see this." She handed Isabel a tablet, a video already playing. It was grainy, shot through the lobby's glass walls, but unmistakable. Isabel and Mateo at the drum kit, their hands moving in sync, their eyes meeting for a fleeting moment. The caption read, "CEO and Janitor, Drum Duet Romance or Rumor." The video had 50,000 views in 6 hours, shared across internal Slack channels, and now leaking onto social media. Isabel's stomach dropped. "Who recorded this security footage?" Carla said. "Someone must have pulled it from the overnight logs. We're investigating, but it's already on Reddit." Isabel handed the tablet back, her voice cold. "Find out who leaked it. Now." By evening, the video had hit 200,000 views, with comments ranging from, "This is so wholesome," to "Power imbalance much." The board was in a panic, demanding a statement to clarify the optics. Isabel ignored their calls, her mind racing. She found Mateo in the staff stairwell, wiping down handrails with the same quiet efficiency. He didn't look up when she entered. "I was wondering when you'd come," he said, his voice calm. She held up her phone. The video paused on his face. "It's everywhere." "I know," he said, still wiping. "Someone in accounting winked at me this morning and called me Maestro. Thought they were having a stroke." "This isn't funny," she snapped. "They're turning it into something it's not. Saying, I'm using you or you're using me, or I'm trying to fix my image with some feel-good stunt." He finally looked at her, his eyes steady. "And what do you think it is?" She blinked, caught off guard. "I think it's real. Whatever this is, it's the most honest thing I've felt in years." He studied her, his expression softening. "Then, why do you look like you're already running from it?" Her voice cracked, just a fraction. "Because I know how this ends. They'll drag my name, question my judgment, my leadership, everything I've built. You think I don't know what that feels like?" His voice was calm, but sharp now. "I walked away from the only thing I was ever good at, so my brother could breathe. You think I don't know what it's like to watch a life dissolve?" She looked away, her arms wrapping around herself like armor. "I didn't ask for this." "No," he said. "But you played for it. You showed up for it. And now you want to hide." "I'm trying to protect you," she snapped. "No," he replied, his voice unwavering. "You're trying to protect your image, and you're using me as the excuse to retreat." The words hit like a cymbal crash. She stepped back, her breath shallow. "You have no idea the pressure I'm under." "You're right," he said. "I just know what it feels like to be left standing when someone walks away." "Is that what you think I'll do?" she whispered. "I don't think it," he said. "I see it." The next morning, the headlines hit. Music execs' late-night jam session sparks ethics debate. Zenith Beats CEO in cozy duet with Janitor. The whispers followed Isabel through every hallway, every meeting. She felt them sharp and relentless, but she didn't flinch. The board scheduled an emergency meeting for the next day, and she knew what was coming. A demand for answers, a carefully worded ultimatum. That night, she went to the waterfront where Mateo was teaching his group of street kids again. The bucket drums echoed across the pier, their rhythms raw and defiant. She watched from a distance, her coat pulled tight against the chill. One of the kids, a lanky teenager with a faded hoodie, was struggling with a syncopated beat. Matteo knelt beside him, patient, guiding his hands. "Feel it here," he said, tapping his chest. "Not in your head." The kid tried again, and the beat steadied, grew stronger. Isabel felt her own heart sink with it, a rhythm she hadn't let herself feel in years. She didn't approach him. She just turned and walked back to her car, the city's lights blurring through the rain. But as she drove home, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was a video link, a clip of Matteo teaching the kids sent by one of them. The caption read, "He's the real deal. Don't let him disappear again." Isabel didn't sleep that night. She sat at her desk, the video playing on a loop, and for the first time in years, she pulled out her old drumsticks. They felt foreign heavy, but when she tapped them against her desk, the rhythm came back faint but alive. And somewhere in that beat, she heard Matteo's words, "Survival changes what you play for." She wondered what she was playing for now. The boardroom at Zenith Beats was a fortress of glass and steel, its long walnut table reflecting the cold morning light like a frozen lake. Isabel Torres sat at the head, her posture straight, her hands clasped, but her usual armor-tailored blazer, flawless chignon, was gone. She wore a simple navy sweater, no makeup, no pretense. This wasn't a negotiation, it was a reckoning. The board members filed in, their faces tight with discomfort, their whispers carrying the weight of scandal. The viral video of Isabel and Matteo Alvarez playing drums in the lobby had spiraled, hitting 500,000 views, with headlines screaming, "Power Play" or "Passion Zenith, CEO's late-night duet raises questions." The board wanted answers, and they wanted them sanitized. Richard Langston, chairman, and a man who'd built his fortune on predictability, spoke first. "Isabel, the optics are a disaster. The narrative's taken on a life of its own, speculation about favoritism, ethics violations. We need to control this." Isabel's voice was calm, cutting. "Control it how?" "By pretending it didn't happen." He slid a legal packet across the table. "We've drafted a separation agreement. You step down quietly, we spin it as a personal choice, philanthropic maybe. Music outreach, community work. You keep your severance, your reputation stays intact." Margot Chen, VP of Marketing, chimed in, her tone clipped. "We're not asking you to apologize for feelings, Isabel. We're asking you to take responsibility for the risk you've introduced." Isabel leaned forward, her eyes steady. "The risk of what?" "Being human, I sat at a drum kit with a man who reminded me what it feels like to breathe." "I'm not ashamed of that." Richard's jaw tightened. "This could cost the company millions. Investors are rattled. Then maybe we should ask why we've built something so fragile that a single moment of honesty can shake it," she said, her voice low but resolute. "When did we become so afraid of truth?" Silence blanketed the room. Margot looked away, her pen tapping nervously. Richard closed the packet with a snap. "If you reject this, we'll move to a vote of no confidence. Removal with cause. That impacts your severance, your legacy." Isabel exhaled slowly, her hands unclenching. "I've carried Zenith through lawsuits, market crashes, artist meltdowns. I've worked 18-hour days, built brands, mentored interns who now sit at this table. And you want me gone because I played a drum with someone you didn't see coming." She stood, her voice softening but unyielding. "Let me ask you something, Richard. When did we stop believing in music?" He flinched just barely. Isabel reached into her bag and placed a small envelope on the table. "What's this?" he asked. A donation to the Zenith Foundation, she said, for music programs in underfunded schools. Name it after whoever you want, but don't let it go to waste. She turned to the room, her gaze sweeping over every face. I'm leaving, not because I'm ashamed, but because I've remembered who I am. No one spoke as she walked out. She didn't take her nameplate, didn't look back. Some endings don't need punctuation, just purpose. Outside, the Seattle rain had stopped the sky a rare, fragile blue. Isabel stood on the sidewalk, her reflection in the tower's glass, no longer the ambitious, lonely woman who'd entered a decade ago. This woman was awake, alive, and unafraid. That evening, she found Mateo on a bench near Pike Place Market, the hum of the city blending with the distant beat of street performers. He was watching a group of kids, his bucket drum crew, practicing near the waterfront, their rhythms raw but full of heart. Headphones hung around his neck, his eyes on the horizon. Isabel sat beside him, silent at first. "You're not wearing the armor today," he said, not looking at her. "Left it in a boardroom," she replied. "I resigned." He turned, his expression unreadable. "They'll regret it." "No," she said, her voice steady. "But I won't." He looked at her fully now, his dark eyes searching. "You're different." "I remembered something," she said. "The title next to your name means nothing if it costs you the rhythm inside you." Mateo's gaze softened. "I didn't want to be the reason you lost everything." "You weren't," she said. "You were the reason I found it." A breeze carried the scent of salt and coffee. Mateo's voice was low when he spoke again. "Diego's getting worse. Another attack last night. He's in the hospital now, critical. They're talking about a transplant, but it's Boston specialists' costs. I can't even think about." Isabel's heart clenched. "Is he awake?" "Barely," he said, his voice cracking. "He keeps asking for the drums for the beat we were working on. I promised I'd finish it for him, but I can't." She took his hand, her grip firm. "Then we'll finish it together. For him." He looked at her, tears brimming but not falling. "You think he'll hear it?" "I think love carries," she said, "especially through rhythm." They drove to Seattle Children's Hospital, the hallways a blur of antiseptic and flickering lights. Diego was in room 412, small and pale oxygen tubes framing his face, a heart monitor beeping too softly. Mateo sat beside him, one hand wrapped around his brother's, his shoulders shaking. Isabel stood back, giving them space, but Diego's eyes fluttered open, landing on her. "You're the drum lady?" he whispered, his voice frail but warm. She smiled, stepping closer. "That's me." Mateo said, "You're loud," he said, a faint grin tugging at his lips. "Like a good beat." She laughed, her throat tight. "I try." Mateo looked at her, his expression raw. He's always liked loud things. They sat by Diego's bedside. No drums, just their hands tapping a soft rhythm on the blanket. A syncopated beat they'd been working on, a fusion of Latin roots and modern grit. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. Diego's fingers twitched just slightly following the pulse. Isabel felt it, the tiniest press against her palm, and her eyes met Mateo's. "He hears it," she whispered. A doctor entered her expression, measured but kind. "His vitals are stabilizing, but this isn't sustainable. He needs a transplant, likely in Boston. You've got weeks, maybe less, if another episode hits." Mateo stood, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "How much?" The doctor hesitated. "With travel, surgery, recovery, it's in the hundreds of thousands." Mateo leaned against the wall, his breath shallow. "I can't afford that. I can't even afford this room." Isabel stepped forward. "Then let me help." He shook his head, his jaw tight. I can't ask you for that." "You didn't," she said. "I'm offering." He looked at her, pain etched in every line of his face. "Do you know what it feels like to have your pride measured in hospital bills?" She reached out, touching his arm. "Do you know what it feels like to have money and still feel useless? I've made million-dollar decisions in boardrooms while my soul begged for something real. Don't take that chance away from me." He didn't speak, just pulled her into a fierce, silent embrace. Two people holding on at the edge of fear. Over the next 2 days, Isabel cleared her schedule, called every contact she had in pediatric cardiology, and donated anonymously to the hospital's foundation to fast-track Diego's transfer. But she didn't stop there. She brought coloring books, noise-canceling headphones, and a small hand drum to Diego's room, teaching him to tap out simple rhythms between tests. Slowly, room 412 stopped smelling like antiseptic and fear. It began to smell like hope. The board meeting came and went. They called it a mutual transition. Isabel called it the price of honesty. She packed her office that evening, her assistant Carla watching quietly. "You don't have to go like this," Carla said. "Yes, I do," Isabel replied. "They built this place for profit, not people." Carla handed her a folder. "These came today. Letters from people who saw the video. They're not mocking you. They're moved. They said you made them feel again." Isabel smiled softly, tucking the folder under her arm. "Then maybe I did something worth the noise." She left Zenith Beats that night with a box of belongings and a worn notebook of rhythms Mateo had scribbled years ago. The next morning, she stood outside the hospital watching a car pull up to take Diego to Boston. He was stronger now, still small, still fighting, but his eyes were bright. "Isabel," he said, tugging her sleeve, "will you come visit when I get my new heart?" She knelt, her voice steady. "I'll be there the day it starts beating." Diego grinned, then whispered, "Bring the drums." Mateo stood by, his eyes misted, but his posture proud. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You're welcome," she replied. "But I didn't save him. You did every day by showing up." He looked at her, really looked, and said, "You saved me." They stood there as the car pulled away. No rush, no words, just a rhythm humming between them. That evening, Isabel found a note slipped under her door, a flyer for a performance at the Fremont Community Theater, a small venue tucked at the edge of Seattle's Arts District. An evening of resilience featuring Mateo Alvarez and friends. Proceeds to the Diego Fund for Pediatric Music Therapy. Her heart skipped. She hadn't known he was planning this. The theater was a relic, peeling paint creaky seats, but alive with anticipation. When Isabel arrived, the room was packed, not with critics or celebrities, but with nurses, teachers, baristas, and the bucket drum kids Mateo had been teaching. The stage held a single drum kit, its chrome gleaming under a single spotlight. Mateo stepped out. No uniform, just jeans and a black shirt, his drumsticks in hand. He didn't speak, just sat and began to play. The rhythm started slow, a heartbeat, then grew layered, fierce, a fusion of Latin grooves, jazz flourishes, and raw punk energy. It wasn't just a performance. It was a story, hospital nights. Diego's laughter, the weight of a mop, the hope of a new day. Halfway through the bucket drum, kids joined him, their rhythms weaving into his raw but powerful. Then Isabel, unscripted, stepped onto the stage, picking up a pair of sticks. The crowd gasped, then cheered as she layered a counter-rhythm, her hands remembering what her heart had buried, their eyes pesomint, and for a moment, the world was just them and the beat. When the final note faded, the room didn't applaud immediately. It stood still, as if no one wanted to break the spell. Then, one by one, people placed small paper lanterns at the stage's base. Each one a flickering wish for Diego. Isabel sat beside Mateo, their hands brushing. "Do you think he heard it?" he asked. "I think he was the one playing it through you," she said, her voice breaking into a smile. He nodded, his eyes distant. "I didn't think I had anything left." She leaned closer. "You were never empty, just waiting." Weeks later, Diego's surgery was a success. Mateo and Isabel moved him to a temporary apartment in Boston filled with hand drums and sketches of rhythms. They didn't chase fame or headlines. Instead, they launched Rhythm of Resilience, a nonprofit, bringing music therapy to hospitals and schools. Every night, Diego would say, "Play me the beat." Mateo would softly until his brother fell asleep. The lesson wasn't in the music alone. It was in the courage to show up, to love through fear, to rebuild when life demands a new rhythm. Isabel and Mateo learned that true strength isn't in titles or applause. It's in the quiet moments of connection, the beats that carry us through loss, and the choice to play again, even when the world says stop. They built a life of small concerts, shared dinners, and letters from kids who said music made them feel seen. And in every rhythm, they heard Diego's heart strong and steady, echoing forever. This story is for anyone who's ever felt silenced, unseen, or afraid to start again. Music isn't just sound. It's a bridge, a lifeline, a way to heal. So where are you watching from? Drop a comment, share how music has carried you through, and if this story moved you, consider subscribing. There are more stories, waiting stories that heal, stories that matter. Stay kind, stay brave, and remember, sometimes the quietest hearts play the loudest beats. You just have to listen.